cloud. Okay, part 2 is going to the cloud. Do we have any assignment related questions other than the one Nicholas brought up during break time in the middle of page 5 of the syllabus? I say you must watch and blog at least 8 of these. If you're reading that and worried about that, that's just something left over from a previous semester. Don't worry about it. So there's probably other things in the syllabus. When you start creating syllabi that are 25 pages long, there's bound to be a stray sentence or two somewhere in them. So I appreciate Nicholas's or Brandon's finding that extra sentence in there. Michelle, you have a question about the assignments? Or
yes, I do. February 13 is coming up more quickly than I realized, and there are 2 assignments where we are encouraged to pair up. And I went on Canvas today and just instinctively went through the discussion section, but could not post a discussion. I wanted to look for somebody to partner up with, or what's the best process, etc.
So I used to have a sign up board. I created a little template, and I probably could find that again and just have people go and match make up that way. I have an assistant who could put that up. I think a better way this semester is to create a thread within Canvas. And so Christian can remind me after class to create a thread, and Christian could even create it. I think he has co-instructor capabilities. I mean, right during class, Christian could go in and just say, matchmaking, assignment, midterm assignment matchmaking activity. Who would like to find a partner. So that's one way. The second, another way is, I think I shared the roster with everyone. If not, in the announcements are everyone's name and emails. So that if there's someone who you've heard and who maybe you can read their blog post and take a look, they might have common interests. You can go to the Padlet, which some people filled in, some didn't. Christian, if you could put the Padlet link in the chat so that people can look. That had people's interest areas, and you could find someone with similar interests. So 1, we could do it through Canvas. 2, you could do it through looking at the Padlet interest areas and just reach out. You just have to reach out to someone. So you know, if you want the more direct approach, just reach out through email. If you want more indirect approach, use Canvas. And then just post what you're thinking about doing or what you're interested in doing. Again, it's encouraged. The other instructors that will say require it. I've taken out all the requirements for pairing and collaboration because I know it's a stressful thing. However, as you see with Natalie and Yua, collaboration is required of the positions. So the instructional design field is no longer a solitary endeavor. I'm not sure if it ever was, but increasingly we're using Teams or using Slack or using some Zoom and using other such technologies to collaborate face-to-face as well. So I encourage it, and I think you'd learn a lot. Typically people do. Christian and Bo worked on a project last semester together and did a great job, and other people have worked with partners. Amelia, there's another person in the class from Japan, so you could reach out if you want to.
Yeah, thank you. We paired up, and it's been just great because we're both here. We both have the same objectives, and I just want to put a vote for collaborating. Reach out blindly on email. And for us, it was a geographical connection, but we're actually both in higher ed. So,
is he from Japan originally?
Yes.
Okay.
I believe so.
Yep. Whereas you're an expat. You're over here.
Exactly. So we are coming in with 2 different perspectives. And it's been really good for me to get a perspective from someone who grew up in the educational system. And then me, I'm just looking from the outside.
Are you time limited there? When are you gonna plan to come back, or you don't know?
No, I'm flexible. I've been here after I graduated from university pretty much on and off. So I'm pretty settled here, but the educational system is quite different. So.
Yes, it is. Very interesting, kind of beautiful country. Beautiful country. Gosh, everything is so picturesque in Japan. Yeah, a lovely place. I hope I go to that conference in December, but again, it's in the middle of nowhere, it seems. So I have to have my reservations, but I will try. I'm set up to do it. I used to do these things all the time. I think after the pandemic, I think people are more hesitant than they were pre-pandemic in some degree. Other assignment related questions or comments? What do you think of having people like the last couple of weeks? Ziheng also talked about backwards design a couple of weeks ago. We're hearing similar terms that are being used that aren't in your textbooks, that aren't in the readings, but they're what people are doing and using. So I'm just curious, would anyone prefer more of the old timers, the retired people who have been in the field for 40 years, or you like this approach with mostly the younger people? Everyone's smiling. So,
well, it's kind of interesting when you have different people in different roles, because we can kind of see it as a whole like puzzle fitting together. So having some older people in the field is actually beneficial, so we can kind of see how that fits into what's happening now.
Right.
Yeah, the backwards design concept I had not heard that before, but it makes sense. And I think a lot of it has to do with just the constraints that organizations deal with, and maybe traditional models, an ISD just is the luxury of time maybe not be there. I don't know. I'm curious to know more about what other designers are doing, particularly in higher ed. So it kind of works. Right.
I think some of this, the people I have, it just happens that they're in the news and all of a sudden they pop, I see them doing something, I just invite them in. So I have a master list. I have this giant list I work off of, and I change it all the time. I say, well, I haven't had that person for a while, and I try and it's never a perfect selection, but we have 4 open weeks, and I will try and get the last 4 maybe be more corporate based, since these are a lot of higher ed people. So I will try in that regard, or we just won't have a guest those particular weeks. But I've reached out to a couple, and we'll see if that happens. But I think that will provide more balance if we get them. But we'll see. Yeah. So I'm glad to see you're thinking and wrestling with the changes in the field, and I'm actually glad to see that people are wrestling with concepts, and that you're a little bit mushy or overwhelmed, because I didn't introduce myself properly in the first week. My job is to make your brains mushy. If you're not mushy, then there's no learning taking place. If there's no cognitive dissonance happening, no kind of wrestling with the ideas, or feel a little bit overwhelmed, I'm not pushing you to the edge of the envelope, I'm making it too easy. So I want to have some of that. I want to have some of that, but not too much. So find that balance between, feeling as though there's a lot there, and can I wrap my head around it? But I don't think anyone can ever truly wrap their heads around the entire field of learning, or instruction. It's just too big. There's no one course, no one person that can represent what learning is, or e-learning is, or motivation is, or anything in that regard. We have different people who take a snapshot or a slice of the pie and try and make sense of it. But at this point, anyways, I've seen macro structures to kind of look at human learning and human development from a macro level, but you can't do much with them. You can look at them and smile and say that makes sense, but you can't operationalize them all that much. So we're in this field. It was a very applied field, and then it was a very theoretical field, and now I really don't know. Is it a more of a theory-based field or an applied-based field? And it really is a bit of both. And partly having these younger people come in because of the web-based learning, because of online learning and online collaboration, the models are changing faster than what can get in the books and what we can read from the old timers. Many of the models no longer fully apply. They still apply, they should apply, but they're not necessarily something we can use as the thing. This is the model that will work in all cases. And again, we're addressing more diverse learners than ever before. We're addressing more types of learners in terms of age groups than ever before. People are coming back and recycling for a second degree, third degree. Look at the guest next week, she's going for 4 degrees. She's from Taiwan originally. Xuying Yuan, are you from mainland China or Taiwan, or?
I'm from mainland China, not Taiwan.
Okay. Yeah, what city are you from?
Hubei province.
Hubei province, okay. So my last time there was 2015, I got to 7 different cities and talked at 18 universities. No, 12 universities. I gave 18 talks at 12 universities in 5 cities. I was, I ended at Beijing Normal, where I will maybe go in May again to Beijing Normal.
Beijing is beautiful.
It
Yeah.
is beautiful. You know, the culture in Beijing is just wonderful. It's just so much art. I couldn't believe the art, the music, the waterways. I mean, it's got the ring, all the highways and all the bustle and all the traffic. And if you ignore that and you go to you find these exclusive kind of places that Beijing offers, it's a really delightful place to be. And the food is, of course, great too. And the people are wonderful. You know, so I do like Beijing. I think I like Shanghai better because it's more like USA. But Beijing is really unique, and it's more like this temperature with snow and, you know, mountains and the Great Walls close by and everything else. So, you know, it's just all the stuff they built up over time in Beijing. It's just it's a wonderful place. China's a wonderful place. Yeah, you must miss it. So what I'm going to do is play a little of Gagne tribute so that you can feel emotions about Gagne. Now, these things that people hold in terms of memorials to folks, they're not the most engaging things unless you're in the room with them. We're watching this remotely, so I'm going to show 2 minutes and then another 3 or 4 minutes. So I'm not going to show much of this, okay? I'm going to show right at the beginning where Michael Spector, who was a Glaston 622 last semester, he's memorializing Gagne. And then Marcy Driscoll comes in to tell stories about how she was hired at Florida State to replace Gagne. Okay, so we'll hear those little bits just to get a personalization element to this. I'm not saying this is the most engaging. However, this is from the AECT Legends and Legacy videos. If you do like this video, there are many more, and you can do an assignment around the watching videos. If you like watching videos like this, most of them are interview based. They interview the person before they die and put the interview up. Okay, so they have a whole bunch of interviews, kind of like my podcast show. Sort of, we put all these, you know, interviews that we've done and put them up on the web, kind of NPR or, you know, something, but they're not high budget. Okay, and they're done by a person named Barbara Lockey, Professor Barbara Lockey at Virginia Tech, and her assistants have done this. Okay, that being said, now I'm going to share my screen, and I'm not sure if I'm going to find it. I'm going to optimize video, optimize sound. I've also done a podcast on Gagne, so so I'm going to play a bit of my podcast show from Gagne from a long time ago, and let's see if I can find. Dang it! Oh, there it is. Okay, I did find it. Okay, so we got to my home page. We can kind of ignore that, and come on, gotta move this to the side. All right. So here we go. And let me know, Christian, just say yes if you can hear the sound. 1, 2, 3.
Yes.
Thank you.
I wanted to begin this tribute just by reading the obituary. It'll maybe provide a context for what will follow. This was published in the Chattanooga Times Free Press, and it was written by Ellen Gagne, I've been told by Marcy. Robert Mills Gagne, 85, Signal Mountain, died Sunday, April 28, 2002. He was a leader in the fields of educational psychology and instructional design. He was born in 1916 in North Andover, Massachusetts. After receiving his Bachelor of Arts degree from Yale University in 1937, he went on to Brown University to earn a doctorate in experimental psychology in 1940. He spent much of his 50-year career in academic positions at Connecticut College for Women, Princeton University, University of California at Berkeley, and Florida State University. From 1962 to 66, he was Director of Research at the American Institutes for Research in Pittsburgh. Mr. Gagne also spent a good portion of his career working on military training problems. During World War II, Mr. Gagne served as an aviation psychologist, developing tests for classification of aircrew. From 1950 to 1958, he was technical director for 2 different Air Force laboratories at Lackland and Lowry Air Force bases, where he conducted numerous studies of human learning and performance. At the end of his career in 1990 and 1991, he worked on instructional design models for military training at Armstrong Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas. During his career, Mr. Gagne never wavered from the idealistic vision of psychology that he expressed in his 1932 valedictory speech at Johnson High School in North Andover, in which he said the science of psychology should be used to relieve the burdens of human life. His research and writing focused on how principles of human learning established through scientific research could be applied in education and training. He wrote 5 editions of a seminal book entitled The Conditions of Learning, and he also wrote numerous other books on principles of learning and instructional design. Mr. Gagne was a member of Phi Beta Kappa and Sigma Chi and was a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science and the National Academy of Education. In recognition of his contributions, Mr. Gagne received many honors, including the Phi Delta Kappa Award for Distinguished Educational Research from AERA and the Distinguished Scientific Award for Applications of Psychology from the American Psychological Association. Mr. Gagne is survived by his wife Harriet, Pat, 2 children, Sam and Ellen, and 2 grandchildren. And then it ends with a note about the memorial service. So that's the context why we're here today. I just came from the D&D luncheon where we recognized and really celebrated the contributions of different people in our field. And we really want to continue that today. So the point of this session is to recognize the contributions, to celebrate the fact that he contributed so much, and to remember who he was. I think, Marcy, you're going to explain how we organize this.
Okay. As Mike and I were talking about what we'd like to do, we kind of wondered, well, maybe a way to bring the personal side of Gagne also, as well as the professional side, would be to involve people who work with him over his career. And so in a sense, this is almost chronological. We'll ask Bob Morgan to speak, who was the person who was responsible for bringing Bob Gagne to Florida State.
Now, at the end of that table there is David Merrill, who I'll end with. I'm going to present on Merrill's first principles, just as an aside. But we won't hear from him. I don't think I'm going to play it, but you can watch this later. I'm going to fast forward to where Marcy comes back. She hands it off to someone else, and then she comes back. I'll let her talk another half minute.
Stuart Weinstein, who was a student at Florida State while Gagne was there and who worked with him on projects, and Gagne's served on Stuart's dissertation committee. I had the fortunate opportunity not only to write with Bob, which is true of many of his colleagues at Florida State, but also to teach with him. And so in some respects, I have some stories to share that are probably somewhat unique. Then Mike will say a few words. He worked with Bob after Bob retired from Florida State at the Army Research Institute. And then Dave Merrill will round us out by talking about some of the work that he and Bob did. They've had, some of you may know, debates that have been published in Educational Technology magazine. And I think actually some videotapes of some of those things as well. So
So I'll fast forward this if I can find this spot here. We've got to go back just a tab. Okay. There, I'll just go back to the
meant Buck Rogers. So, anyway, I'm sure there's a lot of faculty and students that can tell you a lot more stories. In fact, we were talking at lunchtime at the luncheon about some other stories. I hope you'll tell the one you told. Okay, maybe you won't. But anyway, they've had their time, and I want to just echo the fact that because Dr. Gagne made his mark on our field, we've been very, very successful for it. Thank you.
Well, I'm also going to continue in some of the storytelling tradition.
Again, she was a guest last year at this time in this class, and she is delightful. Her name's Marcy Driscoll, former dean at Florida State, department chair, and she has an interesting story how she got to Florida State, actually. She was in the corporate world and decided to go into higher education later after doing other things and overseas. She was in, like Amelia, doing overseas work, I think in Afghanistan or no, Iran.
And start with my first meeting with Bob Gagne was when I interviewed at Florida State a little more than 20 years ago. And of course, I already knew much of his work because the Conditions of Learning had been required reading for me as an undergraduate, and I worked for a time as an instructional designer and had his little Essentials of Learning book, which was a real handy book to give my staff when we were doing instructional development kinds of activities. So I came to Tallahassee from the Northeast, so I flew in and sort of wondered where the town was. And Walter Dick was the chair of the search committee, and he met me at the airport. And one of the very first things he said to me, now this is the first time I had met Walt.
So Walter Dick is a Dick and Carey model that you read about last week. So all these instructional design models either come from Indiana University or Florida State, pretty much. The majority of them do. Syracuse used to be another place, the third place that was big at the time. Now it's the University of Georgia, maybe Penn State, Missouri, Michigan State, Purdue are the bigger places, but really it's IU and Florida State, and to some degree, University of Georgia.
And we're chatting about it, and he's kind of going through what my day is going to be. He picked me up about 9 o'clock in the evening, and I would interview all the next day, and he said, well, you understand that if we hire you, you're going to be to replace Gagne. And I thought, oh my God, the pressure, you know. And of course, as Bob Morgan said, he really, truly is irreplaceable. Well, I met Bob the next morning, and we actually went to lunch together with Walt Dick. Now, you have to kind of picture this. And we're actually pictures I want to draw your attention to here up against the podium. These are archived photos from Florida State's lab. And you have, those of you who have never seen Gagne, he was a very big man, okay? I mean, kind of much bigger than me, and big man. And Walter Dick at that time was driving a basic blue Toyota Corolla that was a single door thing, that wasn't double doored. And so we went to lunch. Gagne insisted on sitting in the back seat. And so you can imagine him kind of wedging himself into the back seat. He finally gets situated, and he's got one hand on Walt's seat and one hand on my seat and his face between. And we're talking along, it's going to lunch, and all of a sudden, Bob says to me, he says, what do you think people learn from television documentaries? And I thought, oh no, trick question. I really, truly didn't have a clue. I had no idea where this question came from or what he really expected me to say. But it was my first introduction to Gagne's incredible curiosity. He really was interested in what I had to say, in how I respond to it. Well, it turns out, it might have been David Owen's dissertation, I'm not sure. He had a student doing a dissertation, and he said, well, I'll tell you. They learned about 50% of But one of the things that I came away with that was this real sense of his incredible curiosity and respect, I think, for his colleagues, where he would from time to time come in the office and ask a question that was sort of almost off the wall, but in fact he was just interested in various things, and so he'd come in and ask these kinds of questions. Well, he invited me to be a co-author on his Essentials of Learning for Instruction book, and it's one of those things he indicated to me that he wanted the teacher's perspective. I was working with some pre-service teachers at the time, and he felt I had something to contribute. Like Morgan indicated earlier, though, I mean, I certainly felt that same trepidation and just awe that I'd been asked by Gagne to work with him. And it just, I thought, my goodness, his prose is so elegant and his writing is so clear. I didn't think there would be anything that I could bring that would contribute in any measurable way. And yet I was terribly flattered that he had asked me to do this. And when we started to work together, it was an amazing experience because he wrote amazingly fast. I write fast. I tend to draft quite rapidly, but he worked much, much faster than I did. And we exchanged chapters. We divvied them up, and he wrote half, I wrote half, and then we would exchange our drafts. And I remember thinking that how could I improve on what he wrote? And yet every suggestion that I made for revision, he immediately took. He said, oh, that's a good idea. And most of the suggestions that he made for my writing, I mean, I thought were sort of brilliant. And yet it was this very humble sort of approach that he took to working with a lot of his faculty. I remember thinking as well that if he ever were to write with a computer, he would be completely unstoppable. but he was someone who tended to be rather impatient with mechanical kinds of things, which many of our colleagues knew. And that leads me to a story that I wasn't going to tell because I thought this was Stuart's story. And I don't know that this was something I actually experienced with Bob. I did travel with him some to AERA, but I actually think it was something another student mentioned to him, and they knew that when Gagne traveled, he tended to be very impatient with airports and things that you have to do in airports. I can't imagine what it would be like for him today in today's world. But now remember, this is AERA, and this is a 5-day-long convention, and one of the things that you actually see in the pictures, Bob always used to wear this gray suit that was with a white shirt, sort of rumpled, and often by the end of the day, the shirt tail would be partly out and maybe a button unbuttoned, and just he looked like your typical absent-minded professor. Well, this student, and I don't recall who it was, when we got to the destination, said to Bob, "Well, Dr. Gagne, if you're trying to be nice, if you'd like me to get, if you give me your claim check for your luggage, I'd be happy to go get it for you." And Bob sort of chuckled and says, "No need, got it right here," and lifts up his briefcase. One of the things I remember very much about Bob when we did travel together and to AERA is he had a real penchant for fast food. And I can recall one day in the office, he asked me to go to lunch with him, and I said, "Well, where would you like to go?" He said, "No, you choose, you choose." And I said, "Okay." So I named a place that was sort of had good, healthy alternatives. And Bob's face just fell. So I said, "Bob, where would you like to go?" And he said, "Wendy's." So from then on, I said, "Bob, anytime you want to go to lunch, why don't you give me 2 or 3 places you'd be willing to eat, and I'll pick from one of them." But whenever we went to AERA, that's the very first thing he would do, is scout out the nearest McDonald's.
I'll stop with that. Stop the sharing there. He's an interesting guy. He was a big guy. I got to go to a talk that he gave in 1988. Now, he worked at the military for a while, so he didn't have the cleanest of language. He knew a few swear words, and he was late for one of his talks, and there were 1,000 people, maybe 2,000 people waiting in the room for him, and he wasn't there. He wasn't there for 5 minutes, for 10 minutes. His plane arrived late, and we could hear this shuffling in the hallways. 1988 in New Orleans, he was shuffling down the hallway saying, "Where the F is the room?" I won't swear myself, loud, until the whole audience heard him. And that was my first experience meeting Gagne. And I know exactly where I was seated. And I was actually next to a guy named Gabriel Salman, very famous guy who I based my dissertation on. And the next time I saw him was 1994 in Nashville, Tennessee at AECT. It's my first AECT. He was wheeled, 6 years later, he was wheeled in on a wheelchair. He could no longer walk. And I snuck into the graduate student seminar. I was, as a faculty, I snuck in. So faculty do strange stuff, and I asked him a question about social constructivism, because he was a behaviorist at the beginning, because he worked with the military, creating those tests for the army. He was doing the traditional testing kinds of things and trainings for them. So a lot of instructional design, a lot of his approaches come out of that military training in the World War II era and beyond. And so he was a behaviorist who changed to become a cognitivist. And I'll talk about behaviorism and cognitivism in the next few weeks. So Gagne changed with the times. And I would consider him an instructional psychologist, if you will. Kind of he embeds many of the theories. If you look at his methods here, and I'll show the slides here in a second, you will get a sense that there is no one approach or one theory that you can see. You see behavior very evident in his 9 conditions or whatever. And as you have pointed out, gain the attention and all this, you find motivation theory and whatnot. But he was at least thinking about social cultural theory and cognitive apprenticeships and that kind of thing in his response to me. which was taking him pretty far from where he had been in the past. So I found that to be interesting and impressive, but a very memorable experience. He died in 2002, they said. So he did live another 8 years beyond that, and apparently writing books and other things and being very successful in his retirement years. Let me go back to, was that interesting for anyone? I mean, Christian, how was that?
Yeah, I love that. That was wonderful to hear some of that background.
Yeah, it was
And
good
I
to hear
mean,
from Marcy.
to hear her speak, yeah, I mean, that I've read her work now for years, and just now seeing her on video.
Right. You've read her work in 711 probably before, or in 520 or 540 if you took 540. With me, maybe that first,
540,
your
511.
first,
Yeah.
my last time I taught
Yeah.
540, right? You took the class.
Yep. The very first semester of my master's, the scared little master's student.
Yeah, I remember
taking
that.
3 courses and should have taken 2. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, hopefully I can teach 540 someday again. I don't know. Okay, let me go to my slides if that's, unless anyone else has a comment or a question before I go to my slides. Has anyone else heard of read Gagne or heard about Gagne, Robert Gagne in the past? Is anyone else here a teacher? You, Jennifer, you got a BA in teaching?
Not exactly. I did a teaching certificate after my BA, so.
So
I always pronounce it Garnier. Oh, sorry.
You pronounce it Gardner?
Garnier. Yeah, that's how I always read it in my head. But yeah, I'm familiar with the name, but I didn't know much about him like as a person.
So think of lesson plans. They teach teachers lesson plans. Basically, it's Gagne approach. And you mentioned Ellen Gagne. When I was in grad school, I read from Ellen Gagne, his daughter. She wrote a cognitive psychology for teachers book. She at the time was at American University, which is in DC, and she's trained as a psychologist. Very good book, very influential. So he had a very successful daughter who apparently wrote the obituary. Matthew, you had your hand up.
No, I think the first time I remember hearing about him was probably in the Reiser and Dempsey book.
Yeah.
And it was, the conditions of learning. I was like, oh yeah, that seems really useful in application. But then during those times in studying, I didn't get a chance to really delve into him too much. So.
Right. So I'll go through them, but so the next few weeks, there are videos, not for the entire one today, but for the next couple after the behaviorism cognitive, I recorded, which basically have the entire thing in it. So we can flip the classroom in one of those weeks. I'll decide, maybe it'll be in 2 weeks, we flip the classroom where you watch the video before and then we have a discussion. And I might present some slides just to fill in the gaps and the buffers and the prompts and reminders, but we can just talk about them. So if you miss anything here, my point is you can watch the videos, which might have more information than what I can talk about with all of you in next 25 minutes. And so let me go into that if I can find the slides. And here we are. And again, there's a little note to my former office mate and visiting scholar. She went back to Korea. Her husband got a postdoc at IUPUI, and her name is Sung-hee Lee. And Sung-hee came to my talk in Korea in 2002, maybe my first time in Korea. Maybe it was the 2004. I think it was 2002, one. Yeah, and then her husband got a postdoc, and so she wrote me. She says, "Can I come visit and hang out? And my government will give me money." So she team taught P540 with me and did some of these slides. So these are sort of hers. Some of them are mine. Some are hers. So yeah, she's now a professor back in Korea. Wonderful person, and she stayed. She got hired by IU Business School for a couple of years too, full time, and did a lot of stuff at IU. So, Gagne is all about instruction.
Some of your slides blocked by the
yeah, I'm trying to see if I can. Is that gone now? Is it still there?
No, not yet.
Okay, let me try this.
There it is. It's gone now.
I'll try hide
Oh.
loading controls. Is it gone now?
It almost was.
Is it
It's in
gone?
the center of everything.
Is it gone now?
Now it's gone.
Yeah, hey,
Perfect.
there we go. That's technology. You gradually get it. So, you know, he was concerned about instruction, but he was also concerned about learning. That's why I call him an instructional psychologist. And there are others, you know, that emerged in the 80s that really, you know, Jerome Bruner, you may have heard of. I had a chance to meet him once as well, very briefly at AERA. You know, people were bridging between cognitive psychology and behavioral psychology and something new that was emerging, this constructivism approach and so forth. But he was really, you know, saying that what's the basics that are going on in the classroom? Well, teachers manage instruction, they plan instruction, they deliver instruction. The instructional component is what he was concerned about, and he was trying to create new models to understand that teaching and learning process. Well, he said there are certain events that happen when you're doing instruction. There's certain types of learning outcomes that happen, certain hierarchies within learning in terms of the higher level skills and the lower level skills. And then maybe a cognitive approach, the information processing approach to learning, can explain it all, can help us understand those conditions, those events, and the types of learning that are taking place in that environment. So a taxonomy or classification scheme is something that Gagne was best known for. And those, you know, any kind of visualization overview of an instructional design approach or model is helpful for instructors because they can see it, represent it, internalize it, and so forth. But he had both extrinsic or external conditions for learning to happen, as well as those things that are internal to one's self. And that takes him away from a behavioral approach, which only looks at external events, to think about what happens inside, the cognitive processing inside the humanness that's going on. It's both intrinsic and extrinsic, external and internal, and that there are 9 events that happen in the effective learning environment, and he developed a template for those kinds of events and what's going on. So those events of learning are those 9 events, and the conditions and the learning outcomes. This is kind of his overview of what's going on and explaining how learning is taking place. This is his representation. Dick and Carey has theirs, other people have theirs. So these 9 events, as you pointed out, number 1, to gain attention. Then we backwards design. We inform learners of the objective. We inform our instructional designers of the objectives, and we work backwards from those objectives. And then we stimulate prior knowledge. Really, a key aspect of all learning is priming what happened before, what people already know. And that's why I didn't start right away with the slides. I asked you questions. That's why I didn't have you start with the slides. We were asking questions. I wanted to prime your knowledge before delivering of instruction, before trying to add to what you already know. You have subsume information under existing knowledge structures or schemas. We can get at schema theory in 3 weeks or so. So you present your stimulus after you remind people what we already knew and did, and then you provide guidance in learning those new materials. So those first 5 communicate what's going on before one actually has learned and can practice what one has learned, which is then eliciting performance and getting feedback and assessing performance, and then trying to get them to transfer to new settings. And there are various prompts or questions that you can embed within those approaches, like, you know, now you did it. This is an example of, you know, how can you do better next time? All these kinds of metacognitive prompting cues or mechanisms to get the learner to process in additional ways or steps. So the first 5 are communicate the behaviors that are occurring before you acquire information. The last 4 are after that has happened. He provides these labels. They provide a way of externalizing what's happened, okay? And so again, you got activation so the middle is David Merrill's 5 first principles model. On the left is Gagne's 9 conditions model, and he's doing a comparison between Gagne and Merrill. Merrill was on the video. I didn't let him speak. He's a good guy. He actually has been a guest in this class once and a guest in P540 once for me. So you see the gained attention. Well, that's activation in the first principles of Merrill. Inform of the learner objectives, that's activation in Merrill's first principle. Stimulate, recall, that's activation in Merrill. You know, present the stimulus, that's demonstration. So you have demonstration, activation, application, and integration. Those are the 4 key principles or first principles. That's why I have the last principles. Merrill's got first principles, Bonk's got the last principles. I'll get to that in a second. So all these different kinds of learning outcomes or things that you want to have happen can go from the very low end stimulus response types of learning, B.F. Skinner and salivation in dogs, Pavlovian learning and chaining. So we're learning how to play a violin or dance the tango or chaining events together, or higher level learning concepts and learning rules and problem solving and so forth. So learning basic facts is in the middle, verbal associations, okay? Discriminating between two different, types of cups. I've got my Beatles Love cup here, and I got my cup from last semester's students. Last semester must have liked me because they bought me a cup. I don't know if this semester's students are going to buy me a cup. I broke it already, but that's okay. So we have to discriminate between whatever is that we're trying to learn. So 8 conditions of learning. We maybe want to drill the learning in. We use stimulus response learning or chaining or verbal associations. If we want to have a learner take control, you might use problem solving approaches, more of a constructivistic kind of approach in that environment. So if you want to get scientists, if you want to, if you want to nurture chemists and computer scientists and good writers, well, you get at problem solving. You don't go to signal-based learning, but musicians and athletes and other dancers. Well, then you go stimulus response and chaining-based learning for some things, not for the entire thing. You want to train your dog, use signal learning. Use Pavlovian conditioning, if you will. Then there are certain outcomes. You might be training your high school son or daughter to drive a car, and those are basically motor skills. Or my son, when he taught himself to play guitar, just looking at the internet and learning it online, he's learning new motor skills. So you might learn attitudes, motor skills, cognitive strategies, processing, planning, reflecting, evaluating, some meta memory kinds of skills. We're fostering the overarching system within your brain to get at, to instantiate new strategies that you want to employ when you're facing a problem that you have some dissonance about, or disequilibrium, as Piaget might say about. And then we got verbal skills and intellectual skills. So these 5 things, he says, are the learning outcomes that we might want to have happen. In this class, I'm not necessarily thinking motor skills. It could be some in terms of learning computer. I definitely want to build attitudes on you and some strategies and some verbal. The other 4 definitely. Okay, so basic facts, you will learn a lot of this is a base class. This is an intro class. You will learn some basic facts. But again, the final assignment should build some strategies, some metacognitive skills and competencies, I would hope, in terms of you becoming a designer of learning, potentially. It's just some basic intro level, of course. We might do some problem solving and some learning of principles. So again, these 9 events, you'll see them over and over and over. If you go online, if you go to Google and you type in Gagne's 9 events, you'll get many of these visuals. So I've just downloaded a bunch of them to show you. They all start gaining attention and formal learning objectives. This is from Gagne sitting in Tallahassee schools and looking at what the teachers were doing in Tallahassee in the 1950s, I would imagine, 1960s. 1970s, and that's how this theory kind of evolved, just from sitting down and plopping down and watching what's going on. Again, this is another way to represent his 9 steps of instruction. So we have an example trying to teach kids about triangles and what an equilateral triangle is, and so you can walk through his different steps to teach students, what would that be, 11th? Christian, is that 10th grade where we're learning geometry? 10th or 11th grade?
We teach about types of triangles in 4th grade.
Okay, 4th grade. Well, when I learned geometry, my geometry teacher put in my yearbook, the best B+ student he ever had. So I'm not the world's best geometry person, but I can play pool. I didn't beat Christian. Christian, did I beat you in pool up there at your house? I don't think so.
Yes, guests often win at my house.
Yeah, I think I hit the 8 ball in by mistake. if I'm not mistaken.
No.
Yeah, I think I lost the first
Yeah,
two and I wouldn't let you quit until I won one. I won the third one.
That may have been the case.
Yeah, it may have been the case. He's humble, but he beat me really bad. Not that bad. So, so what benefits does this have? This model, his framework, it gets us to think about the outcomes that we want. It gets us to think about the prerequisites for the outcomes, what the students need to learn, the prior knowledge that they might have. The unfortunate thing in instructional design and in IST as a whole, or ed tech field as a whole, is it's so much emphasis on prereqs, getting people ready for learning, that they limit the spontaneity. It's a limit to the creativity that can happen. From my belief, from my perspective, this gets us into this pre-prescription of learning, and I'm anti-pre-prescribed learning. I believe that more focus, more onus needs to be placed on the learners for defining what it is they want to learn, not teachers or instructional designers deciding what the learning should be and what the learners should learn. Somewhere it has to, in between, something has to happen. I think gradually we're moving towards learner-centered or learner control of the learning process. But again, it's looking at the external conditions or instructional setting that might guide the learning process or help in the learning process. It also helps us identify where we might be going. What are the outcomes going to be? It helps us in understanding, the characteristics of the learner, trying to understand the context and the characteristics of the learner, trying to understand the resources or the media components so that we can plan for that instructional situation as best as we can, and so forth. So Gagne said, if you only design the methods, you'll be tied to methods. But if you learn the principles, you can design your own methods. That's apparently Ralph Waldo Emerson, but that's also Gagne's favorite quote, apparently. I'll stop for a second. Briefly, I'm going to show Merrill and Bonk. Does anyone have a comment on that or a question on Gagne? Did anyone read ahead? Has anyone read week 4, stuff already? Besides Brandon. I know Brandon read the whole 15 weeks. Right, Brandon?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry. Can you hear me? Not about reading ahead, but about this lecture when you said like somewhere the learners decide what they want to learn versus what the instructors want. There's some in between. Have I stated that correctly?
Yes, sure.
And I don't see in any of these instructional models where they get the student feedback to go a different direction. And I did think one of the readings said that a lot of professors have like internalized the knowledge, so they can no longer kind of talk to the level where someone might be starting.
Yeah.
So my question is, where's the like feedback, how it's going before you go ahead and do 9 steps and find out no one got it?
2 things to that. One is, you're right that there is no one's loop where it talks about getting external feedback beyond the instructor, whether it's an expert or a parent or a peer or someone else. When we get to Vygotsky, he puts the instructional focus on peers, more expert-like peers or adults assisting in the learning process. If you're young, if you have people who are closer in age because they've experienced similar things in terms of societal changes, like the Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z thing, you'll have people who might be closer in terms of zones of proximal development, what's called a ZPD, zones of proximal development. If you have people who have similar zones of proximal development, they'll also be operating and using similar strategies. They'll be able to externalize what they're doing, maybe voice it, maybe explain it, maybe share it, and others are able to capture it and appropriate it for their own needs and utilize it. Whereas an instructor is more of a verticality thing as opposed to a horizontal. It's me to you. It's top-down instruction. It's top-down approach to education instead of more democratic. Right. And so what we hope would happen is something that's more democratic in nature and more instructionally relevant, I guess. And you're right, but so that's why Vygotsky offers an alternative. We'll get to that in about 3 weeks. This course as a whole moves from, if you look at it as if the readings as a whole, it moves from very instructor-centered to being somewhat more learner-centered. Not fully, but the readings are in history and psychology and education have moved in that direction. So the first few weeks might remind you of Psychology 101 or high school psychology. And, there's nothing much I can do to change that other than delete the weeks, but I think they're still important to at least touch upon somewhere in the training in IST, because we still use behavioral theory, we still use cognitive theory, but not as much. So I still think these models are relevant, just not 100%. And we have to figure out where how those approaches, how those learning, I guess that's last semester on learning, how you define the learning environment that allows for both, that facilitates both. So thanks for the question. We get to Merrill. And did that answer at least partly? Is that Michelle or Jennifer? Because I don't have my visual up.
Well, that was me. Thank you.
I don't know who the me is.
Oh, Amelia.
Amelia,
So,
thank
yeah,
you.
So that was a really good answer. And I can see that we are progressing towards different models. So yes, thank you.
Yeah, I can't see anyone because I got rid of the black wall here so you can see. I don't see anyone's video panel. I should know from the accent because I'm from Wisconsin too. Sorry, Amelia.
Yeah, no, great. Thank you.
Normally this time of the year, people like Amelia and I are watching football because the Green Bay Packers are in it, but not this year.
This year I'm a Chiefs bandwagon. If this is
I'm
recorded, we might have to edit that out. But yeah, with my connection to Kansas City now, I'm completely on the bandwagon.
Yeah, so is my brother because his son's in Kansas City. So Merrill has a simple approach. He says, well, there's things you got to do. You got to activate knowledge. You got to demonstrate what the student's going to learn. You got to apply it somehow, right? And then you got to integrate all that into some kind of a schema or repertoire or procedures. And the way to do that is to give people tasks or problems to solve. And then we have those 4 phases that one goes through within their instruction. I think that's a pretty simple model. And so, he's created task-based approaches to learning or problem-based approaches to learning so that, give them the tasks. Tasks might be very relevant, might be very simple to start with and become more complex over time. You tell people, you talk to people what they already know, their prior knowledge, what's called PK, not psychokinetic energy, but PK, prior knowledge. And then you focus on the activating those structures when the demonstrations happen later on. You try and activate and prime those nodes so that they can fire faster. If you've asked them certain questions, if you primed them with questions, you prime them with sayings or quotes, you've at least fired a few neurons so that when you do demonstrate what to do, and in this case, some paramedic activities, CPR or whatever they're trying to teach, in some real world tasks, well, we've primed them with questions about CPR training ahead of time or what they already know about it ahead of time, and then they can apply based on the feedback that they're getting in their environment, whether it's computer-based feedback or human-based or peer-based or something else to perform that particular activity. Then we want to integrate the different steps involved in CPR or whatever it is that we're trying to teach, which involve discussion, which involves representation and presentation, and then reflection on what one has learned. The reflective process, reflective step or reflective phase is probably most important. If you don't do reflection or at least debriefing of some kind, you're going to be hard pressed to have more than the 50% of learning of watching TV documentaries that Gagne talked about. That's where you concretize things. That's where you explicate and internalize and bring things to a state where you can recall it in later. It's not just having available knowledge, but having it accessible kind of knowledge. That's what we want to foster. The woman on the right is a grad of IST. She got her doctorate in 2005. That's Ana Paula Carreira from Portugal originally. She's at Ohio State now, one of the very few PhD students who are in the Big Ten. We have many at Purdue. but we all have her at Ohio State, nobody at Wisconsin, no one at Michigan State, no one at Northwestern, no one at Iowa, no one, well, one at Illinois. Maryland doesn't count, but Maryland is a Big Ten. We have no one I know of at Penn State, no one at Rutgers, no one at Minnesota. So very few end up in the Big Ten. I'm probably missing one I didn't mention. Michigan, no one. One, a master's student is a very famous guy at Michigan, and Michigan State, no one. So she's pretty smart, is what I'm saying. Pretty smart to end up at a pretty good place at Ohio State. So this is his model, and you can get his book about first principles. He talks about these 3 E's: creating effective, efficient, and engaging learning. If you watch Merrill's interview in the Legends and Legacy video, he will focus on that, the 3 E's. It's kind of an interesting, I sometimes in 511 show Merrill's video explaining his graduate training. It's kind of humorous. He's a funny guy. He's an intriguing guy, but I decided not to at this point. But I point out that it's available. It's in there. So what's next? I think we have to move to new models as we move to the fourth industrial age, the fourth education age, or education 4.0, where the focus is students creating or innovating, not just teachers facilitating learning, but enabling them to be creative agents in their own environments and take initiative within those environments. And what I call education 2020. Now, if you've had P540 with me, if you have R546 with me, if you've had 622 with me last semester, I mentioned this in those settings. So I'll just briefly talk about this here. The slides are up in Dropbox. You can download them. But my model is education 2020 vision, because I think we need to create more effective learning environments. Last semester, and Tiana and Mika and Bo and Christian in 622, we need to create more connectedness in and among our students to have a conversation, to have dialogue, as Amelia was pointing out, to have peers discuss the learning with each other. And this is the direction that's taking place in schools today. So if Gagne went to a school, he wouldn't see a normal classroom oftentimes. He'd be in a Starbucks-like cafe. If you go to a Starbucks-like cafe, you might have a totally different kind of instructional design model that you design based on those contextual cues and the types of learning that's taking place, the directedness, the horizontal nature of the learning environment, that's not top down anymore. It's more we all, you and I together to learn something. That's why collaboration is encouraged in here, not required. Okay, so this is the movement towards this kind of thing. Now, I was in Scotland and Glasgow, at Glasgow Caledonian University. I don't think Christian's heard this story. They built a building, a brand new student center, a learning center, where all 4 levels exhibited a different kind of learning. So my friend Les Watson built this, and Les Watson's into space. And the first level was like a cafe, or it was with beanbag chairs that students are sitting on, and games that they're playing and so forth, and it's just socializing and getting to know one another. The second floor was more computer lab based, more individual kinds of learning that was taking place, solitary, quiet spaces, which many of you need. The third floor is more collaboration stations, so social interaction around learning, not around socializing. So the third floor is different. And the fourth floor was counseling and getting one-on-one tutoring and training. Every level was a different kind. Now so the problem was in that building, a lot of money, and over the top, they would have this signage on the top of the building. So if you were flying a plane over the top and landing in Glasgow Airport, you would see what kind of learning events were taking place in the building that day. That was a pretty cool center. I'm trying to think of the famous person in Scotland. They named this Glasgow Caledonian building after. Christian can look up Glasgow Caledonian Learning Center and see what name it has. But the problem, when they were building the building, they had a major flood, and less kind of, I think he might have lost his job. I'm not positive, but he wasn't, something happened where, so he was in charge of the whole darn building, everything. So yeah. So change is happening, and that was 2005-ish. So that's 17 years ago, approximately. So my buddies there on the left side, Dubai Men's College, are sharing stuff. You see, they're They're sharing what they're not solitary learning anymore. The teachers on the right from Indiana or wherever, they're sharing what they're doing. People are no longer using technology to learn by themselves. No, they might not be in the same setting face to face, but we're sharing online. And as we get older, we're moving into this next rejuvenation within our lives. The UK is calling learning of university of a third age to our retirement age, learning new hobbies and skills and so forth. And instructional designers are exploding. We have to build environments for these people. We have to design them, as Yua and as Natalie said. But there are many skills that are needed. Read the Intentional Futures Report. They'll talk about managing projects, which she said the number one skill they're not taught at NIST is project management, technology training. You can see on the left there what skills are needed. Producing multimedia, not as much as project management, okay? Evaluation, big thing you need to know how to evaluate and assess course quality. Quality matters. Instructional design models. You see again, project management at the top there, learning new technologies. As Natalie said, sometimes we have to sit and learn, learning science theory. She said that was important to her and she appreciates it. It's not everything, but it's very important. Strategic planning, working as a team to plan out the future and where we're going. Learning experience designers, learning environment designers, new kinds of occupations are emerging in this field because we're going to be learning all the time throughout our lifespan, whether it's short bits in YouTube. Now, Arizona State's apparently created a new university using YouTube. Yeah, it's called Crash Course, and I'm going to get them in my podcast show. I think I've sent an email. But whether it's short bits in YouTube or longer, boot camp kinds of things, or your graduate and undergraduate degrees, we have a whole continuum of possibilities in terms of learning today that we didn't have before. Even when most of you are just growing up age 4, 5, or 6, these things didn't exist, right? And so for some of you, YouTube did not exist probably for all of you, when you were 4 years old, YouTube didn't exist, okay? Pretty much everybody's about 20 years old now. So no, not quite 18 years old. So we're moving to education 3.0 or 4.0, away from lectures towards more discussions, project-based learning, and innovative. So projects and discussions 3.0. And level 4.0 is more creating projects, creating innovations, creating your own companies and so forth as young kids. And so, we're moving away from fixed teacher to student, authoritarian, transmissive models towards more, informal, socially constructed, peer-based, blended approaches towards more, where we have more lifelong learning, where we have more, coming in and out of learning at different points in time whenever we need it, having learning on the fly, on demand, just in time, all these kinds of things, to education 3 or 4.0. Which is the innovation society. When I go to Thailand, every time I go there, one time, well, can you talk about education 3.0? I said, oh man, I can try. Then the next time I go there, can you talk about education 4.0? They're just making stuff up half the time, but anyhow, this is a figure from Thailand, my friends in Thailand for education. Still, Thailand's stuck in education 2 or 1.0, but I won't tell them that, I think all these books are good ones to read to think about this new age of learning. There are other ones. Just going to bookstore or online. I've got Audible now. Every book is about creativity and innovation today, pretty much everything. And if you want to learn about creativity and the zigzag approach and all that, take my fall course. If I teach in the fall, R511 on instructional strategies. So we're now, have this curriculum where, we have to think about creating it for someone who might be 80 years old, 90 years old, 100 years old. It's a new age that we're, new life expectancies. People are healthier than they ever were before. A 100-year life is not going to be uncommon for the person born today or born tomorrow, or born 10 years from now. The expectation is that they will live that long, actually, barring as long as they don't get in a Tesla and get in an accident because it doesn't work. I don't know. Maybe Christian has a Tesla, so I shouldn't say that. Christian, but no, I don't think you have a Tesla. Ali Jafari has a Tesla, who you met. Yeah.
Yeah, no, we don't. We do have an electric car though.
Oh, do you? Okay. All right. Does it work?
It does. And it goes very fast.
Too fast. Okay. So all these people, Roby Brandon on the right-hand side, he is an alum of IST. He's now the vice provost at the University of Washington. He gave the keynote at IST right before the pandemic. Maybe it was the year before, maybe it was the month before. I can't remember which it was. But Roby is great. He's developing new ideas about stacked curriculum, getting some small courses like Natalie did, and building into a master's degree or certificate or whatever. And we have to start thinking about that. Our new clientele is not the normal 18 to 22-year-old. So I started thinking about that, and I developed the last principles of instruction. And these are the last principles of instruction. I don't have time to go through all these. I'm going to just show you what they are and just mention it briefly. So building in more flexibility and choice, which you probably see in the syllabus. Having high expectations for learners by posting prior student work, which is what I do. I post good quality work, which raises the expectations for your work. Having things be relevant and meaningful, and letting people again have some say in their activities, and having some of the tasks based on recent podcast shows that I've done and so forth. Have a lot of sharing, have a lot of purpose. These are all principles I think get us into this new age, non-traditional, informal, online learning environments with much optimism, yet reality. So flexibility and convenience and all these kinds of things, choice, you'll see in the syllabus, but the balance in choice, not too much choice. Empowering the learners, giving them a sense of autonomy, giving them some sense of control over the curriculum, over maybe even the topics that you're covering, maybe the guest speakers that we're going to have. I have 4 open weeks. Send me a guest speaker. Getting multiple forms of feedback: system feedback, peer feedback, expert feedback, instructor feedback, self-feedback. Building in support structures throughout the courses that you're designing. Some spontaneity. Every once in a while you got to jump up and down. No, that's not what I mean by spontaneity, but just changing it up a little bit in the class so it's not ho hum. At the same time, you want to be somewhat organized and somewhat structured. So it's a balance between chaos and organization. That's where the most effective learning happens. You have to have a bit of chaos, but you have to have organized chaos, right? And then you have to have a networking. Natalie got her job. You got a job through networking, through knowing something. People learn through their networks, with connectivism, now through immersive kinds of worlds. We also need to volition. We need passion. We need to figure out what students' volition is, what they would really like to learn, and make it relevant and meaningful to them. Have some trial and error, teach them that failure is okay. What distinguishes American culture from Asian culture, we have a student from Shoba province, I forget what you said, Hunan province. Anyhow, there's not a lot of failure being in the Chinese curriculum until recently. Now China's focused on creativity. Now Malaysia's getting focused on creativity. Thailand too. The Asian cultures are seeing that they have too much hand-holding, too much pre-prescribed learning, too much rote learning, repetition learning. Now they're moving into, it's okay to trial and error and to fail, to learn from those failures and so forth. And Natalie mentioned open educational resources, videos online and so forth. And they mentioned the connectedness of our peers, whether it's in Canvas or in Facebook or Twitter or some other place that we have the sense of human connectedness and have an apprenticeship from someone else, a chance to explain what you know, articulate your knowledge, reflect on your learning, collaborate with others and so forth. And then have purpose. These are the 10 principles of the my last principle, my learning acquisition template model. Learning acquisition.
Dr. Bonk, I think maybe it's also a cool note to mention your transformative teaching around the world book.
Oh, my book. Yeah. So this year, the fall course, I had 42 people who took that course write chapters on how they're using and my former TA and I came out with a new book, Transformative Teaching Around the World, about a year ago. It's a little short stories of teaching. Thanks for bringing that up.
The what next?
The what next? Yeah. What is next for me? I don't know. So the other thing is learning is moving to become more interactive and collaborative, and we need new roles for instructors. We need instructors as coaches and counselors and curators and concierges and colleagues and all these kinds of things. they all start with the letter C. So that's my education 2020 model. And I could get Gandalf in here.
Keep it secret. Keep it secret.
You have to keep it secret because I haven't published this yet. So we're moving away from the instructor as judge or credit manager towards more counselor, facilitator, moderator, consultant, all these new roles, and orchestrator of all the open educational resources and putting them together in a way that makes some sense, finding the golden nuggets and curating them, putting your course on display on the internet as a course ambassador to the world, putting free contents for other people, again, finding the golden nuggets, finding the cool stuff, and then making them available for your students. And then at just-in-time kinds of learning, service kinds of learning, sharing what's possible as students move along. I'll skip these other ones and just point out that, that's called my last principle.
Engage.
Engage, yeah.
Let's see what's out there. Engage.
I think that's enough for tonight. That's more than I was going to do here. Comments on Gagne, Merrill, or Bonk? Did you resonate with that last section of my stuff? You can see, we got the old Gagne standard stuff. We got Merrill, who gets us towards the future and getting task and problem centered, but it's not enough. And then mine gets us situated into the 21st century, I would hope, of what's going on in classrooms around the world today. I don't know, in Japan, is it also moving towards more focus on the learner, more creativity, more choice, or is it still pretty didactic, instructor-centered, Amelia?
Yeah, pretty instructor-centered, because we have the whole system of sensei, who is the container for knowledge. So that whole system has been around forever. So it's real hard to, I think in terms of someone on the side, that the instructor as a co-pilot is kind of a new idea. And I just wanted to say that was really a great slideshow. It was just so much there at the end with the 20 points. I need some time to digest all that because it was coming in, and I can relate to it all, but I think just separately, each one of those points could have been an entire, talk or whatever. So thank you for that. Yeah, it's just, I got to wrap my head around it a little bit and process.
Well, it's a good point. Double point. Number one, each one of those could be a separate talk on how to build flexibility in the curriculum, how to build choice and relevance, and look at the research out there on meaningful kinds of learning, authentic kinds of learning. And you're totally right. The second thing is, I've presented that many times, dozens, if not, and I still haven't written the book, which means I've not fully wrapped my head around all these changes enough so that I can write the book. It's going to take some time to do that, because that's a lot. It's really a new philosophy of teaching, if you will. It's taking your lens on and off, a new set of glasses, if you will. Do you say Chu Ying, or do I have that right? Chu Ying?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, did I pronounce that right?
Yes, it's all right.
Close enough. So do you agree that in China things are changing today towards more creativity or not?
It depends on the cities. If
Yeah.
you are, like Beijing, Shanghai, it's super cities, they will more creatively. But it's like a town or small cities, they will prefer to keep the normal one.
Good point. Anyone else have a final thought for tonight?
I'm just thinking about the public school systems, and as things become more strained, even if we move philosophically toward more learner-centered instruction, it's harder to implement that with large numbers of students and with requirements to report numerically some sort of performance even more frequently. It's from the teacher's point of view, very stressful to not know how to report progress on students who are taking this more free-formed, organic, choice-based approach.
And maybe that's why these small schools are emerging today in a lot of places. So I see people filling the Padlet. That's really nice there. Thank you for sharing that, Christian, and send me that link. I'll share it again on an email with the people who weren't here tonight. I'll post both sections of tonight up in Canvas tomorrow probably, and I'll make a YouTube a private one as well. You know, partly I presented that last part fastest, so I intrigued you into R546 next fall, which will be online, I think. I don't think I'll have face-to-face. It could be blended. And the sessions that I'll hold will be on Saturdays for 8 weeks. It's an 8-week kind of course. So I'm going to stop the recording. Week 4, part 2. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Education 4.0.